Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Sky, who is a male to female transitioner, a self-proclaimed autogynephile, even though they have issue with that term. And in this conversation, we talk about their life and their relationship to faith, reality, and gender. If you're interested in more of this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating via the tip jars below. Without further ado, here is Sky. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I can't believe I'm having the conversation.
Oh, no. What's the worst conversation you ever had?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question. Um, you know, um, there's quite a few moments I could look at, but I think the worst conversation, well, it kind of depends on like how you define worst, but I guess from my perspective of like emotional, um, I don't know, backdrop to a conversation, it would either be when I came out to my partner as trans. Well, at the time it would have been gender fluid, or told my parents about being trans. Actually, it would be the parents because of how rough
Hmm.
it went.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say that. Yeah, probably number one.
Were those two conversations within a close proximity to each other?
Yes, 2 months apart, roughly. January to April.
Yeah. How old were you?
Yeah. Um, uh, 25,
Okay.
25.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, how have you been? It's been
Oh,
a while since I've seen you since, Gen Spec.
has it? That was November, and it is now June. So, how many months is that? December, January, February, March,
Oh,
April, May,
I'm bad at
June.
math.
Yeah. 8 months, it looks like.
It's enough for some things to happen.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's been pretty busy since then. But I mean, my life is just kind of like has shifted over the last year specifically. Getting married and becoming a stepdad and moving and reconfiguring what that means, and then watching it kind of change who I am or who I'm perceived to be, in a way. So,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't know about the stepdad part, but I definitely knew about the wedding or, you all
Yeah.
getting married because that was love was in the air when
Oh.
saw you a little bit,
Yeah.
There were references made, so yeah.
Yeah. What's the shape of your life nowadays? You working hard full time and have a few
Yeah.
other projects in the works, or?
Well, so yeah, really just working. Want to start a family. That's the big sort of like moment I'm in life right now.
Yeah.
Um yeah, my
What does
partner
that
and I
mean?
we
Starting a
sorry.
family. Yeah. What does that mean? Starting a family.
Oh, having kids,
Yeah.
biological kids, really.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah, we've been trying for a while now. It's been a couple years. But yeah, we've been going through IVF to try to have babies, try to have kids, and nothing yet. We've had a couple close calls and thought we were on something, but found
Hmm.
out no. Um, and yeah, but I'd say that's sort of similar to what you were actually saying about like how life changes had impacted how you were seeing yourself. That also is part of my story since seeing you last.
Really?
Um, yeah, yeah, as of like this past April. So still really recent. But Tiffany, my partner, my wife, Tiffany got pregnant for a very short bit before we got the bad news from the OBGYN that it was not going to manifest. It was a
Hmm.
miscarriage.
Yeah.
And but in that short moment where I thought I was going to be a parent, it inspired me to make a few life changes. and get more serious about my life and just sort of view the gift of time for what it is,
Okay.
as a gift and not just, I don't know. It's easy to take for granted when you're going through the motions and there's less responsibility put on you. But the moment you start feeling that and you recognize that you're going to have all these big decisions coming your way, and that people really depend upon what you decide, it has a way of, I think, impacting you and making you really dig deeper into um,
Hmm.
those different dimensions of those things and really make you ask questions about why you're here and what you're doing and
Hmm.
just think more critically. Yeah.
Why are you
And
here? What are you doing?
oh God, we're going way into this. Um, I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. Um, and it really depends on like when you're catching me in my life as to how I would answer it. I think right now I would answer it from the standpoint of I'm here to love others and think about how to serve others and give back to people. Um, and then something actually, so this is something I'm really glad we're having this conversation is that you had mentioned to me at the Gen Spec conference, and it became a theme of some of the things of the materials I was reading and conversations I was having with other people. And that was this question of life as a test, or like you posed it sort of to me, like, what if life is a big test? And I had already thought about that in the past, but something about the timing of you bringing that up and then having a conversation with another friend who asked me sort of the same thing. He was reading a book at the time. I think it's Letters of a Modern Mystic. Um, I think is the name of it. But it's a short book and it's about a man who seeks to bring God into his like daily existence, as like a test to see how much he can involve God in his life. Um, and I just got thinking more about like, what if life is a big test? And is my life very interesting as a test, or am I living up to my potential? And I just really felt like, no, I'm not. Um,
Hmm.
I and a lot of that has to do with just being in a community or being involved with other people. Um, and so, as well as serving and like giving back to people and sharing what I have to say. Um, and so, in some ways, this conversation is one of my first steps in trying to make a difference with that and really
Okay.
share what I've been through.
Yeah.
And I've gotten more involved in my family's church as well since April, which is when we first thought that Tiffany was going to have a baby.
Why church? Why God when the baby comes in to view?
You're right. Yeah. Why that? Well, sort of, it goes with, I think there's different opportunities for community. But one of the ways that was always sort of like readily accessible or made available to me was the church avenue. My family, and it comes from my family's background. They're very fundamentalist Christian. Um, very God is sort of, I don't want to say like the universal panacea, but like that all roads and big questions and meanings in life can pretty much be derived some way, shape, or form out of God and the role of Jesus in scripture and all of that information.
Hmm.
And it's sort of served as the backdrop for how I was raised and how I thought about and processed information about this world before college, where I became a lot more secular in terms of how I was thinking. And I got a lot more into evolution as a means to explain behavior and to explain how I guess institutions or like questions of God have sort of evolved or been useful for
Yeah.
different groups in the past, and seeing those dynamics in a more systemic viewpoint or analysis, I would say.
More rationalistic, more thinktual kind of
Yep.
way, rather than faithual.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And where are you now in that mix, like between faith and information? You use the word information; it's a very key term. So maybe I should dig into that. But like, where's the balance between this is what I understand and this is what something other than understanding or a different type of understanding?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think I think for me, it comes to this point of I recognize advantages to being religious or at least being a part of a community that's bigger than yourself. I think one of the universal themes that I've seen, and especially prevalent in our culture, is this focus on like the self and putting the self first in like every situation, which is like so contrary to what religions kind of all unanimously seek to reduce or like bring down, is this like self motivation, this self interest.
Hmm.
and and
Or
I see.
or put into its proper place, or find the proper place for the self and the drives that inform the self.
Yes,
I mean, I
exactly.
just make that distinction because certain religious traditions go in the directive of self-abdication or self-reducing, and certain other religious traditions or paths try to articulate self in relationship to other, self in relationship to community, self in relationship to God, and then there's a proper place rather than just making the self the enemy or the thoughts the enemy, that need to be transcended, which is where you go in towards a more Gnostic, which is oddly a more concentration of oneself by controlling oneself rather than understanding oneself in relationship. I'm sorry for the aside.
No, I love it. Yeah, you're much more articulate on it than I am. But I completely echo what you're saying. It's more about viewing the role, or at least recognizing that self-interest has, that we all sort of carry this, and that left unchecked, it's not good. Or at least like that's kind of what got to me, is that, I need to, I don't want to say suppress it, but channel it correctly, like use the energy in the right way, and not use it for just myself or like what I want to do every day or what makes life easy for me. And instead kind of think again about how I'm using my time and what I'm investing into. And when I'm old and I look back on how I spent my time, I want to feel like I used it for more than just my enjoyment and myself. And so I think so Christianity or religion is sort of an avenue from which I'm looking to bring this in and implement this more in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just that. Like I want to form community. I want to participate in the for an analogy, the 10% worker bee is how I kind of describe it, where it's like Jonathan Haidt. So I don't know if you are familiar with that author. But he's pretty prominent, at least right now he is, with his latest book about the anxious generation. But before that book ever came out, he really impacted my life with The Righteous Mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really, really like that book. And I'm actually rereading it right now just to kind of refresh myself on how it all, the moral foundations theory that's presented in it, and how intuitions come first and strategic reasoning second.
Yeah.
And something in there that he describes about is that we're 90% chimp, meaning that we're 90% kind of individualistic, and having our own sort of, I guess, unique qualities as individuals and what that means for us and our mentality and self-interest and those types of things. But then we're 10% worker bee, meaning that we experience like the fullness of life essentially in both dynamics of group and individual. And so I want to tap into that 10% that I feel like I have really let go or atrophy since my childhood, where I used to be more in a group dynamic and would have identified myself readily as an evangelical Christian, before going to college.
Well, there's a natural path of individuation. You begin kind of as a blob or the center of the universe, and then you kind of go through stages of being connected to your family and to your group, depending on your culture. Can be more individualistic or more community oriented, but that hero's journey from probably 16, the sexual function starts, and then you kind of receive yourself as like a very potent thing, and then you go through an arc of self-exploration, hero's journey, going out, figuring out who you are, what is life to you, and then in my estimation around 30, if you're on the proper developmental arc, maybe earlier, maybe later, you kind of realize like, okay, I've tasted the world. but my life is meaningless without relationship to other people. I think, there's this Jesus moment in one's early 30s that I've seen, at least with my life and people close to me, where they're like, you know what, self-sacrifice is the key. And I am only meaningful insofar as I become a part of thou, or I serve others. And, somebody from my point of view, like as a writer, I wanted to be very self-expressive. I wanted to be a poet. I wanted to be really important. I wanted to be, get the awards and get all the attention. And then I realized, like, wait, all of that is hinged upon me serving somebody else. Like, my story has to make other people feel good, not myself, So like dethroning myself and going through that process, I think is a natural process that we go through.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you've had a little bit more time to sort of think about all of that. I'm sort of living it at the moment.
Yeah.
But I agree. Like, I think it's a good arc to go on, and it's a proper way of sort of, it kind of reminds me of that sort of cliche phrase that's like, if you're not a liberal by 20, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative by 30, you have no brain. Or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, going back to the GenSpec conference, our conversation, we met in the bar and we had like a beer or something. Maybe I was the only one having beers. I don't know. But it was a very valuable conversation, because I felt you being capable of receiving some resistance, and challenge. And I felt, well, I mean, I usually don't meet strangers and challenge them, but for some reason, like we connected in a way, and I started challenging you, especially about transition, if I recall correctly. Like, you've made a lot of decisions that put yourself first, that put your surface level characteristics front and center, and cause you to put a lot of effort and a lot of time into this part of you. How important is that part of you compared to all the rest of your life? And to what degree is that aspect of you going to reign over you, or be kind of like, in another framework, like what you worship, what you pay attention to? And like, where are you on that? We had some really good back and forth, and you were really open to me. So I thank you for that. And it sounds like what we were discussing kind of fostered a chain reaction in your evaluation of your values.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was sort of building to that. Like, no matter what, it was eventually going to come to a point where I was going to do something different with my life. At least there's like sort of a momentum by just, I don't know what the right word is exactly for it, but it's like a discontentment maybe is the right word, where it's like, you can only be so satisfied by doing things that appeal to you and yourself. And I guess in the scriptural words, the flesh or whatever. It only goes so far before you're sort of discontented, and you, I think, ponder what's greater than this, or what's bigger than this. And that's where I've had to ask myself some really hard questions, and kind of come back to the idea that I'm really sympathetic to the atheistic viewpoint of that religion evolved as a way to like help groups trust each other and beat out other groups in competition and such like that. I think there's a lot of merit to those things, but I think there's also a role for how religion, or like Christianity, or, really, I say religion because I think it's a theme across a lot of religions, serve a role in bringing us out of ourselves and doing things that are otherwise, like you mentioned, self-sacrifice for a higher cause or for a higher purpose. And I just think, it's almost like we're better people when we look and try to like incorporate these things and hold ourselves accountable in a way to others' opinions on our behavior and our decisions.
Do you want to dig into the transition gender topic?
I thought that's kind of where we were going to go, because I think of your channel as like really centered on that topic. Not always. You definitely go into a lot of things. I mean, I love the evergreen stuff too. I know you were just doing that watch party, and I tuned in for a little bit, but I've seen the videos quite a lot. So fascinating though. I couldn't.
Yeah, you only need so much cringe in one's daily regimen, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so we can go wherever you would like to go, really.
Well, I would like to do that in the context of what we're talking about like your development as a human being, and as a spiritual being, if you don't mind that framework, which I think is something you already brought up. So in the context of growing up in a fundamentalist Christian community, how strict were gender roles, or the image of gender roles? Like how divided were the sexes in behavior and function?
That's a great question. Yeah, and definitely relevant. Something I didn't really consider either. I would say pretty divided. Very much so. I mean, you have men's groups, you have women's groups, and there was definitely clothing enforcement in terms of like, I know there was one point in my childhood. I think I was like 13 or 12. And I was really into like the indie music scene in terms of like, I really liked rock music. I really liked the Christian rock music scene. And a lot of like skinny jeans were the thing to wear. Like that was like the punk rock aesthetic sort of. And I wanted skinny jeans, but I wanted female skinny jeans. I didn't necessarily want male skinny jeans because I kind of wanted to see if I could press boundaries and get away with this and sort of be able to like cross-dress a little bit without it really being cross-dressing, because I could, get out of like, I could basically, say, oh, it's part of like the rock, scene or whatever, and not really like, I could falsely attribute it.
Yeah.
Although it was sort of a blend of both in what I wanted, cross-dressing and just the aesthetic. I like the aesthetic too. But I did get some jeans, and my dad saw me wearing them and was like, no, definitely no. But he was also like, I wore a Green Day shirt one time and he was like, no, and like got rid of that. So, very much like, what you wear needs to reflect our beliefs. And I would definitely say that gender roles, I mean, they would not have let me pierce my ears or do anything like that. Anything remotely feminine would have really been frowned upon.
And how feminine were the females? Like trad wifey, lacy, or more kind of like dungarees?
Yeah, range. There's a range. More female for sure, like more feminine. Definitely encouraged to be feminine. But you would have some that wouldn't be. They'd be more tomboyish, I would say. But of course, would own the female role. They wouldn't be like, oh, I'm non-binary or I'm a male deep down. Like that wouldn't really be something that would come up.
So your concept of yourself as a man, what was that? Like you were a boy, you're fine with being a boy, but the feminine aesthetic appealed to you or drew you, or?
Yeah,
and was it just about boundaries? Yeah. So that's one way of being rebellious, but like, what's the positive motivation?
So yeah, I think, so I don't want to go too much into the, like, read into that cross-dressing story I was telling you. That was just sort of like a moment to talk about the gender role stuff. But, but I would say, like, growing up, I was pretty successful as male. Like, that's how I would describe it, is like, from an outward perspective, no one would know that I had gender dysphoria, not on first glance.
Okay.
You would have to have talked to me and caught me in a vulnerable moment for me to open up and say anything about that, which I did do, but that wasn't until much later in life, like after I'd gone to college.
Okay.
Prior to college, I was very closeted on the whole subject, and no one would have known anything. But I would say that, like, the way I experienced my, I guess, cross-gender experiences, for lack of a better word, was really cerebral, really in my mind before puberty, where it turned a little bit more sexual. But before puberty, it was very much like I just really wanted to be a girl. And I remember as young as about six, where I would have dreams at night where I was a girl in the dream. Well, what's funny is that really thinking back, all that meant was that I had long hair and I had a dress on. like in terms of like what actually was going on in the dream, but I was a girl in the dream. And the dream wouldn't really be centered about it. It would just be like that in some kind of social context. One was like my family was checking into a hotel and I was a girl in the dream. Like dreams are weird, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
things like that. But that was a reoccurring theme and it happened more than once. And at the time, I didn't really have words to explain it. I had zero conceptual understanding, but I knew that I had this about myself. And I'd say like a landmark milestone moment where it really stood out to me that I was like, I guess at the beginnings of dysphoria. I don't really know if I would say it was dysphoric because I was so young, but when I was 8 years old, I was taking a bath at my grandparents' house because we were living there at the time. My parents were building our actual house that we were going to move to. And I just remember in the bathroom praying out loud that God would turn me into a girl.
Hmm.
And I had no words for like why I just had no frame of reference for why I was saying this, why I was praying this, or what was motivating me to do this.
Hmm.
Only later on I would begin to piece it together better. But at the time I was just so confused. And I do remember like my dad coming back into the bathroom and I just froze and just was like super quiet and I was praying he didn't hear anything. Because I knew like it was going to lead to questions and then discussions that I just was so wildly uncomfortable with anyone else thinking or knowing this about me
Oh,
that
okay.
I hesitate to say shame because I don't really like the term for shame at this time. Shame would come more when it was more connected to sexuality.
Yeah.
But at this time, it was like I just knew it was something not to discuss, or like I didn't want
Yeah.
to bring up the subject because I didn't even really know how to talk about it.
Yeah. There's I mean, so knowing that you can't speak about this thing forms a relationship with yourself in a way. And it could be like monitored by shame, or shame could be a part of that, especially when sexuality comes around. But it's also, to what degree was that alienating? To what degree did that kind of differentiate yourself or separate you from your community? Or was that a part of you becoming separated?
Yeah, I kind of left out another detail that I forgot to explain. I was a pretty normal kid, except for one thing. I had this strange proclivity for pretending. And this is, I say this proclivity for pretending as in like, I was very good at self-entertaining myself. Growing up, I would go outside and walk around role playing to myself, speaking out loud and pretending. That's what we called it growing up was, oh, I was going pretending. Like that just meant I was entertaining myself outside. And when I say that this was like a noteworthy thing, I mean, this was like a daily thing that would happen for hours. This was not just something that was in isolation once a month or something. This was like how I predominantly played and understood myself as I would do this like role playing thing. And a lot of times it came from media I would consume. So like watching Digimon. So Pokemon wasn't allowed, but Digimon was okay.
Yeah. Who knows
There was a commercial for witchcraft one time for Pokemon and my mom saw it. So that was the end of that.
Yeah.
But Digimon I was allowed to watch. So I would reenact Digimon episodes to myself and like role play to myself. And then later on it'd be like Lord of the Rings. I was really into fantasy and Star Wars, like all sorts of like worlds I would create in my mind that I would like play different characters and just entertain myself for hours. Like it's honestly pretty eye-opening and pretty crazy that I could do that and actually be so happy. Like just entertaining myself for hours and that it worked. Like, I mean, I didn't need a computer. I didn't need a phone. I just entertained myself with my mind.
Yeah.
And to the extent where there was even a saying where my brother Hunter, who is younger than me, he's about 3 years younger. But we grew up a lot together because he was the closest in age sibling I had. And we even had this, like, I promise I wasn't mean to him, but this was a thing where like he would find me outside and ask me like, say, Schyler, what do you want to do? And I had this really awful response of, oh, nothing with you. Because I was so happy just doing my own thing. And like, but honestly, like that was just, we're very good terms. Like we're
Yeah.
close siblings, but
Yeah.
like
Did
that
that
was,
persist through your teenage years or?
it did a little bit, but it evolved into just talking to myself.
Okay.
Where I'm like, I'm a verbal processor. So
Okay.
whenever I'm like really thinking about something or really parsing a subject, I have to speak it out loud to myself.
Okay. As opposed to writing it down, did you turn to writing or would you just record yourself or just talk out loud?
Yeah, I would write. I would journal, diary, all that kind of stuff. Like mostly though for tracking or self-reflection, usually very intentionally, not just like casually like journaling things. It would be very specific for a certain goal or a certain purpose of making sure I'm like auditing and remembering everything or tracking my thoughts.
Hmm.
And this would become especially relevant when I was looking to make the decision on whether to transition or not.
Have you kept all of these reams and reams of notebooks?
I actually have a lot of it, but it's all online. It's not like
Oh.
it's not actual writing. It's typed.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. So there's this database of your life just floating in the cloud somewhere.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit.
Be careful. I mean, once AI gets a hold of that, you're just going to have another double out there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm gonna keep it under lock and key. Don't let AI get it.
How was high school for you? Did you experience any what I mean, what was the social adversity that you experienced? The key social adversity? Not being understood by the
Mm,
church or being bullied or not fitting in one way or another, or was it pretty smooth for you socially?
Pretty smooth socially.
Yeah.
Honestly, overall, yeah. I mean, again, I was pretty successful at being a male prior to going to private school. So I went to a private Christian school um, that was evangelical, focused. And I actually went to school in sixth grade. So up until fifth grade, I was homeschooled with my brothers.
Mm.
Um, and that I think was interesting from the standpoint of when I first went to middle school. My best friend at the time for a long time actually thought I was gay when I first came to school,
Mm.
and I attribute it now to a lack of male socialization that had happened to me prior to that, and I was pretty expressive as a kid, and so and I had a high pitched voice. I hadn't gone through puberty, so I was really received as like a pretty expansive, like gender expansive is kind of the word I like to give
Hmm.
individual. But going through middle school and seeing how the boys were, I was very socially absorbing. I was like a sponge to
Yeah.
all the activity and everything because I was so into it. I loved school. I had like great grades and I loved going to school every day. And that was like that until high school, where I started to be more of like your mainstream.
Mopey
Um,
boat.
yeah.
Huh.
um, Yeah, but yeah, like I loved it so much. And I realized that once I was in middle school with these other kids, I realized how lonely I had become when I was homeschooled in my fourth and fifth grade years. I just didn't get a nearly enough social interaction. And I realized how much that was needing to like help me make sense of different things.
Hmm.
Where if you have other people and they're going through things and they're sharing, it's like a multiplier effect almost in terms of how you can understand the world and how you can start to fit yourself in the relationships of where you stand and
Yeah.
how you fall in the social paradigm.
So, but it sounds like you were successful at catching up.
Yes, I
Okay.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were successful at being a male, but like, what was your role? Like, if there was some sort of 1980s era high school drama, like, which clique would you have been in?
Yeah, which clique was I? I was somewhere between the preppy and the nerd, I would say.
Hmm.
I didn't fit neither really well. I have parts of myself that really liked video games. The one thing I wasn't was I was not into sports.
Okay.
That was pretty clear. Like there was a lot of pressure at my private school to participate in sports, especially if you're a male and have like physical athletic ability of really any level. Like basically, if you're not overweight, you need to play a sport kind of thing.
Hmm.
And um And so like that fell on me, but I kind of learned I had to stand up for myself and say no because I
Oh,
did cave to a lot of peer pressure. I'm a people pleaser. Like when it comes down to it, that's probably not a surprise. And so I I fell to the pressure a lot to accept like playing in sports, but at the end of the day, I didn't really like the sports itself. Like I just did it for the social element of appeasing people, helping out the team, helping out the school, and being like, yeah, I'll be another person to play the sport. Basketball and cross country were really the two areas that I did do some of that in soccer. But I never played like baseball or that was the big one that I had a lot of pressure to do and I never did it.
what about
But
girls?
girls, yeah, I would say I had a high school relationship when I was in junior year to senior year. I dated a girl in the grade above me.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, there weren't a lot of girls at my school. I mean, there was like, this was a really small Christian school. I was in a graduating class of 18.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it was slim pickings, like
Yeah.
literally, like
So what
you
about
didn't
girl?
really,
Yeah,
yeah,
them
yeah.
girls.
And yeah, and the relationship was really good for me. I had to approach my parents and make a case for dating, because the main way of thinking of it was like courting was
Yes. Yeah.
the
It's everything's got a
expectation.
purpose, especially with regard to sex. Like this has a forward direction and marriage is the point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Okay.
nailed it. In terms of the mindset that we all kind of had at that point.
Yeah.
But I made a case for it, and I knew something about myself. I had learned enough at this point to know that when I went and did something or participated in something, I learned so much more than just trying to follow it without testing it myself. So I kind of learned this, like, I like to test things out. Um, a lot. Like that's how I predominantly learn, and that's how I think we all kind of learn. But some people are better at internalizing messages via words from others, like, don't do this, you shouldn't do this. And
Yeah.
then that's sort of like wisdom in a way to be able to take that and then actually use it
Yeah.
without having to test it out. But that never worked for me. I was insatiable when it came to testing things out, and that was a big part of why I went to a secular college versus Liberty University that my brothers all went to, and
Okay.
pretty much a lot of my, yeah, the
Where are
predominant
you
pipeline of my school was
where
there.
are you in the birthing order?
The oldest.
Okay. And so there was kind of a path laid out for you. And then to what degree was there a pressure on being the oldest? Do you think that was unique to your position in the birthing order?
Ooh,
Were you like,
yeah, I'd
because
say,
in fundamental, like firstborn has a particular context and content in the Christian heritage.
yeah. Yeah, no, the firstborn has, yeah, I mean, it's all in the Old Testament. The firstborn is everything. And it was sort of a theme carried forward a little bit. But I wouldn't, there were definitely dialogues from my parents about how the actions I did influenced my younger siblings,
Yeah.
my three younger brothers. I have three younger brothers. Um, and so, being the oldest of the four, I definitely had like a pressure to set the precedent and sort of, demonstrate the right behavior for them. But I would also say more impactful in the experience for me was that I was sort of the test child for a lot of the policies that my
Yeah.
my parents would try out,
Yeah.
right? With raising kids. And that's a normal, very normal thing, but it led to sort of an over-disciplined childhood early on.
Yeah.
Like literally when my dad would come home from work, my brother Hunter and I would greet him at the door because we were so excited to see him come home. And my parents were really good parents. I just want to stress that now, and I've come to really appreciate that
Hmm.
more as I've gotten older. But my dad would come home, and the first thing we would say is, Daddy, we didn't get any corrections today, which were spankings in our
Yeah.
lingo. And so, like, when you know that that's like the first thing you're greeted with, there's probably, it's probably a little too much.
Yeah.
But in the environment that my parents were in, again, very church focused, very church heavy. A lot of good family friends are still based around the church to this day. That was normal in a sense, and
Yeah.
encouraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in your high school, so you had experimental girlfriend, it sound like, or test drive girlfriend? Is that what?
Yeah, I mean, I did love her, or at least at the time, like felt like really emotionally attached to her. And it sort of affirmed to me that I can be with girls. Like that's
Did
definitely
you have doubt
what I
about that?
like.
Did you have questions about
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I would say I'm bisexual. I mean, that's definitely true for me.
Okay.
Now, especially that I've transitioned, I'm absolutely bisexual. Um,
Hmm.
but before that, I was sort of more confused on whether or not like girls or boys would be a better fit for me. And when you're bisexual and you have the potential for either, you got to parse that out a little bit. Um, and so that was the beginnings of me parsing it out. And I didn't have any experiences with guys in high school. Wouldn't be till college that that would become more of a piece of the story. Um,
Was there fear about being homosexual that you had to confront?
yeah, yeah, there was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, more fear about being trans though. To
So
be
you
honest,
knew,
because
when did you come across that idea?
yeah, great question. So when I was 14, um, I'm not exactly sure how I can't remember it in detail, but I can remember that there was a moment where my family wasn't home and this was when I had now started going to through puberty, and testosterone got intermixed into the equation. And like you said, like that sexual awakening of like what that teaches you about yourself was really hitting me. And I say 14 because that's when I remember doing this Google search, but I searched like, what does it mean if I am like sexually, if I have to think of myself as a woman to experience sexual fulfillment? What does that mean? And pretty quickly came across the typology, Blanchard's typology
Okay.
online. Yeah.
What year is
And read
this,
that
if
and
I
was
may
like, oh
ask about?
no. This was 2006. I
Okay.
think I was 14. Yeah,
So the
2006.
the gender ideology and how tight it would get later on hadn't yet. It was still easy to access this information. It wasn't completely politicized.
No, I mean, all you had to do was dig for it.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
I did have to dig for it a little bit, but I have a way of just, I don't know. I wouldn't have been satisfied with any of the other explanations.
Hmm.
And that, well,
Like
that
that
would be
you're
sort
trapped
of,
in the wrong
yeah.
body? Like what would be the explanations that you wouldn't be able to digest?
Right. So this idea that like I have a gender identity or a brain body mismatch, it just it felt wanting. It didn't really explain the conflict that I felt like was due to the sexuality, but manifests in all these various ways that I would come to understand as gender dysphoria once I get to that point of the terminology catching up. Because this was 2006. There were no trans YouTubers to look at. Like, this is like early in.
Yeah.
And I'm just searching articles and finding stuff online that I honestly was just so sad about what I was reading, and
Hmm.
felt like it wasn't really describing me all the way, but at the same time, like this is the best there is. Like
Okay.
this is what it's saying, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, I just kind of resolved that I wasn't going to think about it and I was going to push it out of my mind and just
Okay.
not deal with it. But I knew deep down that this was going to become a bigger struggle, or could become a bigger struggle as I get older.
Okay.
And that definitely happened.
Yeah.
So.
Were you aware of like needing to be careful about what you gave yourself fantasy wise, and to what degree was this problematic discovery of yourself related to your faith and God and sin and shame and that bundle of wrestling?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's still difficult to parse out fully because I had this way of like, I mean, so moral reasoning kind of serves a purpose for, in my view, for bringing people into your court to like kind of sympathize with you. You have your intuitions, but moral reasoning comes second to rally people to your cause or your
Hmm.
situation. And for me, it was a way of sort of rationalizing that this was okay. Like God didn't have a problem because the emphasis in the church was always like, don't look at porn, don't masturbate. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I won't do any of that. But if I think about being a girl, it's fine. Of course, inevitably, it would also lead to some of the, self-pleasuring and doing that. But
Mhm.
it wasn't by like, I had a way of sort of thinking about it like, well, if it's just in my mind and it comforts me, it's fine. Like, it's not really a problem, but I'm not going to go out and say anything and I'm not going to share about this because it's not going to bring me any good things. It's
Oh,
just
okay.
going to concern people. And
Okay.
because it hadn't really reached the point of dysphoria at the point it would eventually reach.
Okay.
But looking back, I actually do think I had some dysphoria. And it's like something I parse more retroactively. But I had this weird ritual after I would shower. I would like massage my chest and try to like pull the fat forward. Almost like
Hmm.
I really wanted to grow boobs. Like I really wanted to have boobs. And I would Google like taking supplements or certain dietary things I could do to like help feminize my body.
Yeah.
And no, like there was nothing I could do. And I knew like the few products I found that promised to do it without giving you without taking hormones, like I could just tell they were shams and this wasn't
Okay.
going to work.
Yeah.
And I never fell for it. It was also risky because I wasn't able to even consider those options until I had a credit card, which was 16. My parents took me to the bank and we got a card, and I was like, oh, this is like a ticket to potential ways to like start doing this stuff. But I never did anything. I never did anything about it.
Yeah.
So,
We brought up GenSpect, and there was a funny fallout. Well, not funny. There was tremendously
oh,
dramatic fallout, which was kind of hilarious in a way, about Phil Illey, who's written a book on autosexuality, is what he calls it. And half the book is about the male version of that, which is autogynephilia. And in the discussions or the arguments or the meltdown around that, it was very apparent that people in a certain camp that's broadly construed as ultra GCs or gender criticals, or the kind of the rad femme subset of the people who are in the fight against gender ideology, especially around children's, where everybody can kind of agree. There's a very difficult, it seems like they have a really hard time understanding sexuality as something other than a fetish. Like there's either heterosexuality or homosexuality, which is not a fetish, but then anything other than those two things is a fetish, and it's just put into a peg. It's like, okay, you're a pervert, and everything that you do to that is based on this sexuality is an aberration, and it's one way or another a signal that you're dangerous or whatever. Like there's a lot of moral things, and it seems to me to be the case in being involved in those discussions, is that there's this really tight hold on sexuality being only about sexuality. But if you are an autogynephile, if you are a homosexual, if you are a heterosexual, that informs a lot of your decisions, not just in how you get off. If we're talking about male specifically, it has to do with your gender expression. It has to do with how you interact with people on a variety of different levels. And even if you're if you're having a conversation as a heterosexual male with a female, your sexuality is informing a lot more than just like trying to get her into bed. It's just like, how do I compose myself to you? How do I make sure that you think that I'm funny but not a threat, or that's that you have to put the sexuality into place. Like there's all these different, and then how you dress. It informs so much more than just that one act. And so the autogynephile, if that is something that is true, or just like an occurrence in males, it's not just about getting off on the thought of being a woman. It's not just about the erotic target. Error is another way that they put it. So like when you're massaging your breasts after a shower, there's a meaning there. Maybe there's a sexual component, but like, what did the breast symbolize for you? Like, what did you want to, like, why was that motivation there? Did you examine it, or was it just kind of a fleshy, just a physical thing? Was there a meaning attached to that for you?
yeah, so those particular rituals of like taking a shower and like trying to like massage the pecs, the breasts, and bring, fat forward, I think was the coping for my dysphoria.
Okay.
honestly. It definitely wasn't sexual. Sexuality, like the sexual stuff was much more contained and much more it wasn't really like that manifestation wasn't how that I don't think that was a manifestation of that is what I'm trying to say. That was more connected, I think, to the negative feelings of how my body was developing male, and I desperately wanted it to develop differently,
Hmm.
anatomically, even though it wasn't like I would come to say like, yes, autosexual, autoheterosexual, that describes my overall experience. But I also think that, there's a lot of things like you just said that are informed separately that are connected possibly to your sexuality, or at least like how you relate to that, or, in that sphere, but aren't directly tied to that experience. And so like another good example is shaving my body hair. That I did quite a bit when I was in high school. That those are the two main things I did, which were like try to like massage my pecs. And ironically, what's so funny is I actually did have a big chest, but it was a very big male chest. And it
Hmm.
turned out it was because I loved working out my chest because that made it bigger. And my favorite, so I swim team. My favorite stroke was butterfly because you would do like the butterfly stroke, which would build up all this, and push-ups were my like main way of like working out, which would also build this up.
Hmm.
It was a lot of what I did was around trying to form those anatomical features. But back to the shaving,
Yeah.
I would try like when I got really dysphoric, I would shave my body hair, and I actually scarred myself from this.
Really?
You can probably see on my chest I have a scar right there, and it turns out I have a skin, I guess, condition or precondition to like scar easily from trauma to the skin.
Hmm.
And I gave myself scars on my legs from this, which really annoys me to this day.
Hmm.
But basically, I wanted to get rid of the body hair. I hated it so much, and I was like OCD about it. In fact, I actually ended up after transition, I've done electrolysis on my whole body to eliminate all the hair essentially.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah. So anyways, but back to this whole thing of like, I think there's more. I've written some about this to myself to try to explain, or at least parse like these types of things. But on the sexual stuff, like the sexual stuff for me really, really came out more when it was like the first thing I remember is when I turned 14, I had my first nocturnal dream, and it was involving me turning into a girl, and it was the most sexual, crazy thing I'd ever happened, and it was just in my dreams.
How did you process that outside of that moment?
I didn't know what to make of it, to be perfectly honest. I just simply didn't know. I was like, this is so weird. Um, I remember thinking that, but also thinking like, oh, I kind of want another dream like that again. It was so fun. It was so great, but it was very bizarre and very strange.
Hmm.
And later on, it would turn into like, in order to experience sexuality, I would always have to mentally overlay the thought of myself as a woman to experience anything sexual. And I found this out with my first girlfriend when things got a little bit more physical in the relationship. I didn't really have a response, but if I would kind of close my eyes a little bit and project in my mind, I would have a response.
Hmm.
And so, yeah. Anyways,
So,
I sort of on this
yeah.
journey to learn about myself. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to have psychological implications that you have to have some sort of intentionality within your sexuality from the get-go, where you have to involve your mind. So you can't just relax into this physical exchange, this intimate exchange. There's like you're already like there's one layer of removal from it,
Yeah.
from connecting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's probably been the most thing. I mean, that's the thing I've lamented most about this condition, I would say, about this orientation is it is very enriching into yourself. Into yourself. It's all into yourself. And I don't want
Yeah,
to say like it's narcissistic. I don't think that's true. It's just how you're wired, but it
yeah,
can lead to that and it can encourage that because that's rewarding to you.
yeah.
So it's like, which is why I'm becoming so much more interested in things that subdue that or channel it correctly, because I feel like I am losing time to, not doing enough.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
You're a deeply moral person. The,
I don't know about that.
well, okay. At least you're presenting one on the YouTube channel, in a podcast. But
You're
yeah,
catching me in a moment of life like that. That's what I
okay.
was-
But yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, this could, even if you're not narcissistic, this could predispose you towards narcissism. Being this, what you're calling dysphoria, it's how many steps away from vanity is that, or which is another word for narcissism. Like how
Yeah.
far removed are you from that?
Well, I mean,
Or were
I would
you
say
you're facing a cliff where you're just going to be, and you're from a moral community, so you have to have learned about self-sacrifice, about vanity not being a good road to go down. I don't know to what extent it was vilified. It's not like cardinal sin or whatever, but you've been issued warnings about this, I suppose.
So not really. I didn't think of it as much from like it wasn't as disruptive. So the dysphoria that really came to characterize my motivation to transition was disruptive to my life. At this point, it's coexisting pretty easily. At least through high school. There was no real conundrum. I wasn't at the point where I was like, I'm going to inevitably transition. I just knew that it was sort of a possibility and something I had thought of before and had wanted to do. But when it came to the trade-offs of what it would mean to do it, no, like I'm happy enough as a male and I'm living life like that. I have moments where I really am dysphoric and shave my hair and do those, weird rituals. But overall, like on the regular day in, day out, I was making it just fine. And I was really okay with the way things were going in my life. But that would change as I got older, and particularly in college and after college is when it would really peak, and it would become this question of I'm making decisions in my life, in particular one really big one, which is who I'm going to marry, and I can't marry her with this. I can't marry her with the possibility of transition. And at that point, it was pretty much like I was ready to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, to solve the conflict.
Describe that ramping up to that. Like, what were some of the key moments in college and after college where it intensified?
Yeah. I think so. As I went to college, I went in with this mindset of I want to experience everything I can, but I also need to stay loyal to God and fulfill his purpose. So I went into college as an evangelical Christian, and almost as like a warrior Christian. Like I'm a culture warrior for Christianity, because that's how I was raised from my background in school. Like every Wednesday was this seminar at my high school, and would be about how to like battle secular ideas and defend the faith and all these things. So I was like wired up for this from school. But I went into college just kind of being open-minded, but also seeking out Christian organizations. And for the first semester, I got involved in InterVarsity, which was a Christian organization at the college, but I never made any really good friends in it. And I ended up befriending my roommates, who were a lot more just secular roommates. So I went to James Madison University, which is about 2 hours away from Richmond, Virginia, which is where I grew up. And by the end of the first semester, I wasn't feeling as connected to the Christian stuff and to the Christian groups. And I decided I'd go out for a party, and actually drink and get drunk and just try it and see what it's like. And I did. And I drank the jungle juice and I had a great time and I had a blast. It was like the most fun I'd ever had in a night. And I woke up the next day, and for some reason I didn't have a hangover, and I did all my homework before 7:00. And I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This is great. And I immediately started to question a lot of what I had been raised to think. And that's what would be the next theme for the remainder of college, basically, is where I would just press into figuring out ways to analyze and think about, sort of test out Christianity in my own way and what it meant to me. And I would pretty quickly not identify as a Christian anymore and just sort of say I'm agnostic, actually. I just don't know.
Yeah.
And exploring things. But to your question about the dysphoria stuff, there were moments where I was dysphoric and would push the boundaries when it came to stuff I had done with cross-gender expression. In particular, there was a summer where my parents were gone, out of town, and my family wasn't at home, and I was at home, and I had acquired, so I'm in college at this point, and I had money, so I had acquired a lot of feminine attire and feminine makeup and things like that. And I resolved that I was going to go out and experience, I guess, a night in full drag, like in fully cross-dressed and everything, just to see what it was like, just to understand this part about myself. And what I learned is that I loved it, and subsequently hated it because I loved it so much. And it was so conflicting. Like, that's like the best way to describe this, is it was just so conflicting. And that conflict grew. So I dressed up and I saw myself, and I just remember being like, oh my God, I love how I look. I love this style. I love how I feel. I just feel so like I'm expressing this bottled up femininity that's sort of been like, I don't know, contained and repressed for so long. And I just needed to get it out. And I drove downtown, and I remember going through the tolls on the way in, and I was just crying. I was a complete wreck. And the person looked so concerned when I was paying for the toll, because I didn't have an Easy Pass, so I was paying in like cash or something, and I just had to interact with them. And I just remember, like, I couldn't, when I finally got downtown, I was going to go in the gay bar, I hardly could open the door because I was just so upset and I was so conflicted, but I was also loving it. It was very strange.
Wow.
And I did. I went in the bar and I befriended the bartender pretty quickly, who was a gay man, and absolutely loved him. And I actually didn't realize it at the time, but I think he was like very much interested in doing things with me, and I didn't know, thinking he was really nice. But I would go back eventually and do the same thing the next year, a year later. And same type of thing, where I was just crying and bawling my eyes out, but going downtown to explore and experiment and push boundaries on what it's like to be I would say a woman in society, but really at the time it was more like a cross-dresser or someone in drag, because obviously, you know, you just look at me and you would know I wasn't a woman, but I was presenting as one. Mm-hmm. And I befriended two gay guys, and this time I went home with them, and they fought over whose bed I would sleep in. And that was like, I think, my first like really overt gay sexual experience, where I realized that emotionally it didn't connect with me the same way as females, but I also enjoyed it. Which was kind of, I enjoyed it in a superficial physical sense, but I didn't really enjoy it in the emotional sense.
Was it easier to be a female with a male? I mean, in your mind, on that level?
Yeah, definitely.
With a male there, it intensified or allowed you to play that game in your head, if the game is the right word.
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah, I think game is a little bit like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe not the right word, but I definitely sympathize with what you're saying here in terms of, yes, I think that enables it more. Although ironically, I wasn't, like, when we actually hooked up and did all that, I had taken off everything, and like I wasn't presenting as female when we did the stuff, and didn't really bother me. But I would come to realize that, yes, if I was presenting as female, it kind of supercharged the energy for me and made it more, more fulfilling.
But there was an emotional connection with females that you felt that was lacking with males. Yeah. Why is that emotional aspect important to you? Or was that important to you?
It was important for partnering, like for life, like someone that I could continuously come back to and relate with, and feel like fully comfortable with. So a big part of the reason why I didn't want to go the route of marrying a man, was that I felt like there were parts of myself that would show their maleness, and I would not want him to see that or, be confronted with that. So like I'm lucky enough to present pretty convincingly as female in most situations and circumstances, but something that characterizes the autosexual side of the typology is that there's always some degree of effort into the presentation of the gender identity, or however you want to explain that.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of recognize this, and big part of me with wanting to partner with someone female was that element. I just would never feel fully comfortable with like opening myself up to a long-term male relationship like that.
One danger of transition is that it can lead you on a path of non-self-acceptance, because you're always like, you don't know where to just like accept yourself for what and who you are. Like there's certain parts you can change and certain parts that you can change, but it really depends on how much you're willing to like put up that effort. And effort is, it's a part of being a human, but like also just being like a part of authenticity is actually being relaxed and just natural yourself. So how did you, what was the counter dysphoria, right? Like that, whoa, I have to work, so this is exhausting me. Like, or with some other people, especially detransitioners, what catches them in the end is that they just can't be themselves at all. And they're always worried about passing. This thing called passing just becomes like this nightmare on their shoulder.
Yeah.
Like, how did you, and I guess we're kind of skipping a little bit ahead, but were you aware of that when you're calculating your decision on what to do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, totally. I was, my likelihood for passing was sort of a big part of how I thought of the treatment for it. So I skipped over something that really influenced me in 2018, right before I came out as trans, or came out as gender fluid, actually, which would morph into trans, because I just wanted to give myself space to explore this identity in an open way, meaning like I had some way to tell people, because I was just so... I just knew it would throw people, at least at first when I came out, because again, I was very successful as male. People would never have expected this. And so, oh shoot. Oh yeah, the book I read. So Understanding Gender Dysphoria by Mark Yarhouse was really influential in how I conceptualized the words for my experience. One of the crux of his book is this three-pronged framework of how to make sense of gender dysphoria, in sort of approaching it from a Christian lens. And it's three things. It starts with the integrity framework, there's the disability framework, and then there's the diversity framework.
Okay.
Yeah, the integrity framework starts with understanding God's creational intent as outlined in Genesis, and the general themes that sort of support traditional gender roles, more or less, and seeing yourself in the struggle from that lens, which doesn't necessarily give you a lot of options, but it's a starting point for how to think about the dysphoria experience. The second
so
one,
in the beginning, God created them man and woman. Like,
right. Yeah. The creational intent is that you are male because you're created male, and female because you're created female, and there's a sanctity to that, essentially. Yes. There's an integrity to that.
Okay.
That should be respected and followed.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I'll just briefly touch on the disability framework, which views gender dysphoria as more of something that is an experience that is a result of our fallen world, much like any other sins. Like there's a lot of sin in the world type of thing. And, dysphoria isn't necessarily sin, but it's a received experience like any other experience that's the result of the fall, more or less, of man. Again, is outlined in Genesis, and recognizes that dysphoria can present ongoing problems and challenges for individuals, and therefore needs to be managed or dealt with in some way. And then the final one is diversity, which really is like it sounds. It celebrates the expressions and, kind of use it as a natural facet of human expression that deserves to be, sort of celebrated and endorsed as, God's has this holistic creation, and this is one aspect of that.
How
And so,
how did those three things interrelate for you in your mind, and where did you end up? How did you end up integrating those?
yeah. So the first thing was that it just gave me words. It
Okay.
just gave me words to describe my experience. One of the biggest themes was that I couldn't talk about it well because I didn't know how to talk about it well. I still feel like I don't know very well how to talk about it. I'm always learning new ways
Yeah.
and finding tangent themes. But it gave me words, and one of those was gender incongruence, and thinking about the disconnect and the problems that disrupt my mental space from this dysphoria. Like, what does dysphoria really mean?
Yeah.
And it essentially, again, to me, it comes down to one big word, which is disruption, which is that I can't just function in my day-to-day life without being disrupted by reminders that I'm male, I'm not female, and I can't wear what that girl's wearing, or I can't go and join the women's group that's a little bit more sensitive or more understanding and empathetic. Instead, I'm going to the male's room or a male's side where it's like, ooh, rah, rah, we're men. And it's like, I don't really connect with that.
Yeah.
And, and it's, uh, you know, yeah, it was sort of like that, and
Yeah.
and highlighting that and the problems of like really envy for women. It was what it really morphed into.
Really.
Yeah,
That
really.
sounds like a negative word. Is that a negative word for you? Envy.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. In the sense that like it stole my enjoyment from things that most people would otherwise enjoy,
Yeah.
because I wasn't enjoying it in the way that I wanted to enjoy it. It's not in the way that connected with me, and just sort of accepting it's, yeah, that, okay, I guess I'm not able to do it that way or experience it that way because I'm a male.
In some respects, society can accommodate that, and culture can change around that. And to some degree, it's just not proper. And where's that line drawn? Who draws the line? Our federal government at this point in time wants to erase the boundaries of sex altogether, including sports and bathrooms. And
Yeah.
for in
The Title
the
IX stuff.
pursuit of ultimate equality. But anyways, there's contradictions in there. What was your thought of, like, well, I want to be accommodated and I can change my dress, I can change my body, but to what degree do I want to require or impose my desire on my community? And
Oh, I didn't want to.
You didn't?
I totally didn't. No, oh no. I was very much like, I don't want to force anyone to be uncomfortable with this. I just never wanted to push it on anyone. And so like when I actually did decide to transition, I didn't start using female restrooms until it was awkward and I was having problems using the male ones. I have a specific experience that triggered it at me at work. At the time, where a security guard was actually using a urinal and I was washing my hands, and he double takes and looks back, and I'm only like 3-4 months into transition into medical hormones, like very early in. And he's like, sweetie, do you know you're in the male's bath? You're in the wrong bathroom. Do you know you're in the male's bathroom? And I was just like kind of horrified a little bit and just ran out and was like, all right, I think that's a sign. And from there on, I just used the women's and never.
Was there any
ever had
counter, like going into the women's, where did anybody say, dude, this is the women's? Okay.
No, that was pretty eye-boggling. In my view, it was kind of eye-opening that never happened and that I was sort of welcomed. But I also don't necessarily know how obvious it was that I was like male but female presenting in the women's space. Later on, I actually have a moment where I am using a stall in the women's bathroom and it doesn't lock. And a woman comes in and opens the stall door and I shriek and I'm like, oh my God, no, like she immediately was like, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. This was a year later. So this was a lot later. And I had at this point had facial feminization surgery. So I was like very flawlessly passing from like a superficial point of view.
Yeah.
And I'm washing my hands and she's washing her hands. And I'm kind of like, they need to fix that stall. And she remarks right back, but yeah, they do. But it's okay. We're both women. And I can tell she means that like we're both women, like really women. And we leave and I immediately run back to my partner I was getting dinner with and told her the whole story and was like, yeah, I don't think I have any issues with this in public anymore. But it was just eye-opening to me that like, yeah, I mean, but I kind of knew going into transition, the decision that was actually a big part of the timing for me was I needed to do this sooner than later because I wanted to be able to pass. I wanted to be able to actualize my experience and live it out. I made that decision and I was like, this is my way. And I'm still grateful. I still have no regrets to that. It's been like 5 years now. And I'm like, but I'm always open-minded to the fact that maybe as time goes on, I'll change my mind or I will want to detransition. I don't know. When do you decide if a transition's successful? Like how many years do you have to wait,
Yeah.
Like,
Well, if you're being honest with yourself, your conscience is kind of your guide, right? Because another data point from the detransitioner interviews is that there's like this overhead, like I'm lying to people. Did that come up for you? Like that you're a male
like
in female clothing?
Deception of like, it hits at certain times. And it's not something I necessarily feel like in every conversation because not every conversation has focal points that would be different if I was male or female.
Yeah.
But if there is a point in the discussion that hinges on their thinking me as a female or like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but whenever it's gender enters a conversation and then someone goes, oh yeah, because we're all women, we think this. And that's where I do feel a little bit more like, oh, like.
Not all women.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, exactly. That's when it actually gets to be a little bit more like, oh, am I deceiving? But if moments, I mean, if it never goes that deep, then it's not. It never really enters that. But if I'm going to have a real friendship with someone, I'm going to tell them.
Yeah. There's, I can't remember the term for it, but it's like deceiver's joy or something like that. There's like this is just another temptation that you're putting in your path, like feeling like you got away with it. And I know it's kind of a psychological property that I've seen online. People discuss like, why are people lying? And then like getting really happy about it. It's just like something that, it's a temptation. So, like the old saying is, don't tempt an honest man, You're in this position, you're putting yourself in a position where you might be tempting yourself to be a deceiver. That's one thing you could or be a narcissist, be obsessed about vanity and stuff like that. It's just, you're putting yourself in a moral gauntlet in these different ways, and you're going to test your mettle and see what you're made of in a way.
Yeah. And the counter to that for me to help subdue that was reading the narratives of trans widows and detransitioners.
Really?
Yeah, before I ever transitioned. So I told my parents on Easter night of 2018 that I thought I was transgender. And I didn't use gender fluid.
That was
for
Trans Day of Remembrance this year. Easter that coincided.
Oh yeah, that whole hoopla. And, oh gosh, yeah, like, yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, and yeah, but in 2018 it wasn't. It wasn't. And I remember telling my parents, and that was sort of the big turning point for me in terms of releasing so much pent up fear of how this would go. And I just remember sitting down and like, I just blurted it out after telling my dad about a week before that I had something big to tell him. And he, of course, encouraged me to just tell him. But I was like, no, I'm going to wait to tell you. And then I told him on this night, and it escalated so quickly. I mean, it went from me just opening up about like, I think I'm transgender, and them being shocked. And then me trying to backpedal immediately and be like, well, there's trans Christians, that's a thing. And they didn't have it. They were like, no, it's not. And basically, all I can remember is it reached a point in the conversation where my dad was essentially trying to rationalize it himself and be like, well, God has grace for all sinners in this world, and sort of just ended sort of on that note of like, well, God forgives, so I'll forgive type of thing. Not the greatest moment, I think, but it was just them trying to cope with this sudden news. But I slept the best I'd ever slept that night.
Really? Really?
Oh, yeah. After having this be a part of my experience for so long, it felt great.
If you don't mind me asking, how long was the arc of healing that relationship, if there was damage caused to that relationship? Or...
There was, yeah. I'd say the arc kind of went, I mean, it wasn't really a defined arc. Like I wouldn't say there were like key moments in the whole relationship situation that really marked like, oh, this is when they became okay with it. Not really anything like that. But they at first were quite hostile to it. And actually my dad, at the time I was living in DC, and he drove up and we had dinner, and he actually told me, not to come back home and present anything feminine, like no nails painted, no ears pierced, all sorts of stuff that was like just them drawing the lines on holding down the male female definition. I called his bluff on that ultimately and said, no, I'm just going to go. You all have to deny me at the door. And they never did. I kind of knew they wouldn't, because they love me and I love them, and we're going to see this through. And that's sort of the approach I took. And unlike a lot of my peers that would have otherwise probably encouraged me to cut them off, I didn't want that in my life. I knew they really cared about me and wanted what's best for me. And during this, like, so as I got more serious, and even though they said not to come home and doing these presentations, we were still talking on the phone. And my mom was basically relaying me a lot of scripture, sending me a lot of things, and putting me in contact with these organizations that would otherwise encourage you not to transition. To which I contacted. I followed through and reached out to them and had conversations. Yeah.
Was there anything that came up with you that did complicate or expand the choices that you were making, that you're thinking on the choices you were making? Counterpoints? Challenges?
Yeah, nothing that I hadn't already come across.
Really? Okay. Wow.
Yeah. I remember when they wanted me to watch this video called Transformed. It was like, I think a 1998 production. I'm not totally sure. But it was Walt Hare and his cohort, I guess, of different detransitioners. And I watched the whole video. And at the end, I kind of came to the same conclusion as always, which was, well, that's a wonderful video, but all you can really come away with in terms of things you can do are like praying and trying to form like, I guess, accountability groups, perhaps, to try to like attack the dysphoria through social enforcement. But like at the end of the day, the options are so little. It's like, what are you left to do to handle or manage your gender dysphoria? It seems sparsely little and just not really any solution for me. And so even though I listened to these narratives of people saying transition didn't work, it just harmed me and I regretted it and all these things, I was sort of left with, I still want to go down this route and I don't have another alternative to really lean on here. And that was sort of that was how it kind of continued.
What about the other group, like the Glitter family or the LGB groups, those online communities? To what degree did you find resources through them or community with them?
I followed a lot of accounts on Twitter, gender critical and not gender critical, like trans activists, like all sorts of anyone that was in the gender space. But I didn't really find I've never really connected with anyone online through that. The closest ever was GenSpect, to be honest. And the biggest reason is that I felt like I wasn't really free to talk about my experience. And I felt like there was just such a pressure to have the same, just to only speak positively about
Or
transition.
only negatively
And
on the other end.
yeah, yeah. And I can't thrive in that space. I need a space that's open to inquiry. It's
Okay.
what drew me to GenSpect in the first place, was that you're free to say what you want to say. And that's who I am at the end of the day. I need to be in a free environment. I need to talk openly. And that's what's going to help me blossom.
Yeah. Yeah, GenSpect, that conference, there was such a dust up over Phil, who wore a dress there, and he's a male wearing a dress. Nobody clocked you at all, like, unless they spoke to you and you told, like, you were there. There's no dust up, just like you glid through there. So it just makes me wonder, you expressed that you had growing envy towards women, and I know within the trans community there's envy for the passable and the non-passable,
Oh,
right? I wonder if have
oh
you
gosh.
come across that, or you haven't really had to
Yeah,
deal
yeah,
with
I
that.
have.
Yeah,
When it comes out as passing privilege.
passing privilege. Yes,
Passing privilege. I
yeah,
have it.
yeah, you
Passing
do.
privilege.
Well, good for you. You should get
No,
the
but it's
stamp.
so silly. Like, why does everything have to be painted in privilege?
Yeah,
Not a helpful, it's
yeah,
not helpful.
yeah. Okay.
And yeah, that's sort of my view of it. And the whole gen spec thing with Phil, that really bothered me like so much seeing that happen because I'm in that photo. I'm in that photo
Oh, were you
too. The
there
I'm
with
in the
Laura
photo.
Bucker?
I'm in
Because
the
I saw a
back.
shapeshifter there. I didn't see
I'm the
you in the
girl
back.
that's way, yes, that's way in the back wearing a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
Like like you said, I'm coasting through undetected, so undetected that I'm in the photo, and no one knows, has a
Oh,
clue.
oh man.
And I know, and that just, oh, and Phil, I thought he did a great job of being super level-headed, respectful, and
Yeah.
not doing anything really provocative whatsoever, except maybe his clothing style that some people really didn't like because guess what? It doesn't tick their aesthetic box.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And like, it's just it just really bothered me because there's this it seems like there's this idea that you can infer intentions based on the aesthetic of that
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
and I just really dislike that
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, it was really
Yeah.
unfortunate, and that caused, I think that caused some damage to the cohesion of the gender critical community that persists to this day. I think it caused a lot of people to radicalize and then counter radicalize around that, which it was unfortunate, and it comes down to people
Yeah.
being poor communicators. A lot of poor communicators and people who like to just have an idea about things and put it into really simple boxes. And part of the
Hmm.
fascination for me with this conversation, even though I do over time, I'm like heavily skeptical of transition. No, I'm heavily skeptical of the idea of transness as an inherent quality. I can jive more with gender dysphoria as you present it. These ideas, like you have, and you haven't said this, so this is the question. With
Oh,
each step of transitioning, with each cosmetic procedure, I guess, to what degree has your voice changed?
oh, um, so it was much deeper prior to transition. It was, I have like a lot of people would say I have like a California accent. Like the way I used to talk, and I still talk a little bit with that. But I have a very large vocal range. Just something I think genetic, honestly. And so I didn't do any voice training. I didn't do any intentional work on my voice. It just became more habitual that I would elevate it to pass and became increasingly effortless to talk higher pitch. All I need to do is start the day off and sing like one or two songs, and then my vocal range is activated, and then the rest of the day it's pretty much good to go.
Wow.
But it does take like at the start of the day, if I speak, it's going to be raspy at best. If I have my cup of coffee, bam, I'm pretty much good. Or if I sing a little bit, like at church, like whenever I go to church, it's like I'm singing the songs and it's very much in the female tenor. Like I'm matching the women and I'm singing with them. And and then afterwards it's like my voice is so high pitched, like it's way up there. Um but
Hmm.
but yeah, that's something that like I think gender is communicated about 90% through your voice and 10% through your presentation. If I
Mm-hmm.
was to like break it out. And that's where it's like I think I'm really grateful that I have a voice that can be
Mm-hmm.
so dynamic.
Mm-hmm. So with each step in transition,
Yeah.
did you analyze like, okay, how much did my dysphoria decrease? And have you gotten to, or where did you get to homeostasis? Where did you get to like, okay, that's cool. I can just live. I don't have to do any more of this
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, well, at first when I went to transition, so a big part of it that I didn't talk about was getting married.
Okay,
So
yeah.
that was the catalyst to me transitioning. Um, I had just finished reading a bunch of trans widow narratives. In particular, though, my favorite was Shan
Shannon
oh,
Thrace.
yes, Shannon Thrace's book, because she approaches it from a secular, like lesbian background, or like at least had other experiences, and so I felt like hers was one of the least biased accounts of how her partner, who she sees as autogynephilic, goes down this horribly narcissistic, destructive path in transition, and I was like terrified that somehow that
Mm.
would also look like my transition and was super absorbed in like what to look out for, what were the red flags, what not to do. But the number one thing I realized taking away was I have to be honest and talk to my partner about this.
Mm.
I had already told her that I cross dress. I had already showed her my clothes and my makeup and actually had really like prefaced her with a lot of this information earlier in my relationship dating her. It was like 4 months in and I told her a bunch of stuff and she reacted so real like calm and relaxed to it.
Mm.
Um really caught me off guard and I was like, okay, that's great. And then 10 months later, I'm ready to propose and I have a ring and I have a really hard conversation with her on the way home from Bible study. And we're driving in the car and I'm sitting there and it's like I'm like, Tiffany, I have to tell you something. And it was that I think and I was like struggling to say it and she's like thinking in her head, she's like, just say it, just come on. And I had no idea, but she was picturing like some really awful things. And I said, oh, I think I might be gender fluid. And she sighs and she goes, oh, good, I'm glad it's just that. And I'm like, what, you're glad it's just that? And she's like, yeah, I thought you were going to say you have terminal cancer or something like that. And I was like, well, that's great, I'm glad you were
Mm.
picturing something worse.
Yeah.
But basically, a month later, I proposed to her because I told her that to sort of get a feel for like, are we going to continue? And seeing as she said yes, I was like, okay, well, I got to go to the next step. And I proposed to her and I was like, I want you to marry me. But then I quickly had to backpedal and be like, well, we actually can't get married because I got to transition and figure out what I'm going to be like to know if you want to actually be with me.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. So we got engaged, but it got like kind of put on hold. And it honestly didn't matter too much because COVID struck right at the same time.
Yeah.
So it like kind of coalesced with that. And and then we had like what I call like the months of fear, sort of, where like every day was sort of like this assessment of, are you going to stay with me? Like, do you want to be with me? And the thing too was like it took me forever to start medicalization. So this was me at this point. I'm gender fluid and I'm just trying out like feminine clothes, wearing dresses and like being very outwardly feminine, being solidly perceived as a gay man for months. This is what essentially quickly happened. I started painting my nails. I just started embracing the feminine just to see like, can I just stay in this space? Can I just be here? And I quickly realized, no, what I really want is to be a woman, or at least to physically embody or look like a woman. I don't want to be perceived as a gay male. And frankly not, I didn't really like the perceptions. And of course, there's a lot more stigma to being a feminine woman. So that's kind of where you start getting into the transing the gay away thing and how that sort of, yeah. Anyways, that's a whole nother subject though. Yeah. But yeah, it starts to get into that. And I was like, no, I just kind of want to exist and move through life being perceived as a woman. And and so I had started therapy and I had conversations with my therapist to begin hormones. But I knew that right away I didn't want to start them. And I was curious to see how much she would push back on me because I wanted to be challenged. I wanted to be really pressed in the decision because I really didn't think affirmation was going to serve me. I knew it wasn't actually. I didn't want to be affirmed. I wanted to be challenged and ask good questions about it. That's why I had done so much research on the people that it didn't work for, because I really wanted to know, was this for me? And and so the months unfolded and the summer months went and came, and by the fall of 2018 I was like, yeah, I'm convinced I do want to go the next route and at least try hormones. The dysphoria was better, but it wasn't really gone. I still wanted to be, I wanted to look female. I didn't want to just express femininity.
Hmm.
And that
What
was sort of what I was able to parse. Yeah.
what was the effect of the hormonal transition, and what were the considerations that you took into account?
The biggest consideration prior to starting hormones was what it would physically do and what it would take from me. In particular, fertility and most likely some sexual function. I was kind of aware of that. Estrogen on a male body is not exactly it's going to do the opposite of the testosterone in a male
Hmm.
body, which is very much, very sexual. And but I knew my dysphoria was connected to my testosterone. So I was sort of like, if I nuke the testosterone, that should immediately reduce the dysphoria. And it did. It actually really, really helped me.
Hmm.
But I had already formed attachment to my female persona or to what I wanted to be as a female. And so I would go on to pursue surgeries. But at the start, I thought I was going to do everything.
Hmm.
And I told my partner, I was like, you have to be prepared for me to not be able to do like the heterosexual sex that we otherwise would do. And that had its own issues, but basically I was like really prefacing her for a full-on transition and saying like, you need to be ready for this. To which she responded like that was really the straw for her, was like if I was going to go through that final surgery, she didn't know if we could be together.
Okay. Yeah.
But everything else was sort of on the table. Is sort of like, we'll just have to see how it goes.
Hmm.
And I took the approach of least invasive to most invasive when it came to doing changes. That was a takeaway from Yarhouse's book, Understanding Gender Dysphoria, as well as other YouTubers online that I saw giving recommendations on how to approach transition, and seeing the common theme of approach what is otherwise easily reversible to what is least reversible, being the surgeries.
Hmm. What was
So
what was your decision on the final surgery? What was the
yeah.
rationale, and to whatever degree you want to talk about that? It's rather personal.
Yeah. Well, let me get there in the timeline. I'll get there really quickly.
Okay. No, that's fine.
So 2019 comes, and Martin Luther King Day, I think the one in January,
Yeah.
January 20th.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I hope I got that right. I started HRT. That was the first day. But like I said earlier, I knew it would take things from me, and fertility was one of them. And so I saw a urologist before I ever transitioned, and I banked. I asked her, what do you think I need for 3 or 4 kids to have children in the future? Because that was really important to me. And she recommended at least 14, 15 vials of specimen to like have. And so I doubled that and I did 30 instead, because I was so adamant that I have a chance to have biological children. And I got that from watching videos online and seeing, trans women have a change of heart and not be able to have kids because they didn't do this. And so I was very big on like, we need to plan this out and do this correctly. And so that was something I did. And so then on the last day of giving sperm to do that, I started HRT later that night, and pretty quickly started to notice changes. And it was about 2 months before I started getting mammed in immediate sight circumstances. And then they would, backpedal as soon as I would actually engage, and they would realize I wasn't a woman. But then as the months go on, quickly after that, it was like constantly gendered female in pretty much every social situation, unless the people knew me before.
How was that for you?
Oh, it was so fulfilling. It was so fulfilling. It just felt like it was shedding away so much weight, but it was also changing the dynamic of my struggle. It was no longer an internally focused and internally locked in struggle. It was now external. It was moving it from inside of me to outside of me, because now people could engage with me on this. They would know that, I mean, I could like talk about being trans, and as opposed to saying I have gender dysphoria and people giving me sort of blank expression because they can't relate to that. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. But why is being trans more relatable for people, you think?
It's just more it's more I don't know if measurable is the right word, but it's more noticeable.
Quantifiable,
like you can,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And how was that? What was the struggle about around that then?
Well, feeling understood or being related to on this topic.
Okay.
When I guess divulged the information to my roommates, which was shortly right around the time of telling Tiffany. I can't remember if it was before or after telling her, but it was in January. And I essentially just broke down at our dinner table after getting Chick-fil-A. We have this thing for getting Chick-fil-A. Love Chick-fil-A. I always, that's actually how my wife and I met on our first date, was we went to Chick-fil-A. Yeah, we have a whole backstory with that. But we love Chick-fil-A. And so basically we got our Chick-fil-A that night, and I just decided I was going to tell them. I had resolved to do this, and I did, but I was just crying the whole time. Barely able to make it out, the words, but I could just tell that they could tell it meant a lot to me, but couldn't relate to it. In like a fundamental way. Like you tell your friend about some struggle, maybe about losing someone in your life, and they can usually relate, because if they've lost someone, they can kind of tie it back and understand and have a lot more sympathy. But something unique, I think, about gender dysphoria is that people, your average person, can't really relate. And then they ask you, what does it feel like? What does gender dysphoria feel like? And you get all these like colorful descriptions of like 1,000 stab wounds or something, crazy, like the noise and like the ocean in your ear and like all these things. Like for me, it was just disruption. It was just an inability to enjoy or otherwise experience life without thinking through this lens and trying to get out of my own head. And that was really what led it to me. So,
did transition allow you to be closer to life? Just closer to just plugging into other people, plugging into your day?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but only if I'm honest to the person about being trans. If I don't give that information, it's on false premises. And it goes back to what you said about the whole deception thing. You don't really know the full story for me. And there's that's a huge part of my life, because I transitioned at 25. So everything prior to 25 is in a pretty typical male-coded experience, except for these things that are gender dysphoria or otherwise my, emotional struggles with being content or happy as a male. Anyways, continuing in the story of the 2019. So I'm medically transitioning now. I've been on hormones, and at this point, it's been about a year since I first proposed, but my wife has decided that she does want to stay with me. She kind of looked past the transition and just really looked at me as a partner, and our connection was always really, really deep. Within the first month of us dating, we had people thinking we were married, based on just how closely related we could just talk with each other and interact. Which is why I was so confident within the first year that I wanted to marry her and be with her forever. And that it proved that energy was really substantial, and she stayed with me. And to this day, she's still with me. We have a house in Richmond, and we have 12 cats that that are our kids until we have kids. Yeah, we love our cats. Anyways, she resolves to be with me, and but we know surgeries are on the table, and the biggest one that I really wanted was FFS, and it wasn't a lot of FFS, facial feminization surgery.
Oh, okay, FSS. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I should explain. Facial feminization surgery, and I wanted it for two things. I wanted it for my hairline and my brow ridge. Those two things, nothing below that. I didn't want to change anything on my face. I specifically wanted my face to remain as natural as possible, but I wanted to hit the most masculine things, which were, again, my brow ridge and my hairline.
Hmm.
And so I did get facial feminization surgery later that year. And and it was awesome. I loved it. It made my makeup pop. It made me feel so much more beautiful in my presentation. And I felt like it was like fully actualizing everything, except I was dysphoric on one thing still, and that was my chest. And it kind of comes back to that whole thing of that ritual of
Yeah.
doing the stuff is like, I had one more thing I really wanted to do. And that was get breast augmentation. And that was the last surgery I had, which was a year ago, basically.
How was
And
that? I mean, from the healing to the just the change for you.
Oh yeah, it was good. I mean, nowhere in the surgeries did I have any doubts or regrets, really. I specifically let the decision simmer, meaning like I didn't rush into it. I did the FFS or the facial feminization first, and I was pretty ready for that one, because I had kind of known what I had wanted to do, but I was very big on waiting because I think the best measurement to know if this is the right decision is to wait and just let it sit. I think the worst thing, just in my particular opinion, the worst thing about the gender affirmation like
Protocol.
mindset in clinics is this idea that you have to hurry. And it's like, no, if anything, it's the reverse. You got to wait because you want to be able to test out your desire and remember why after you do it, what led you to the motivation? Because eventually you'll sort of forget, like people forget things. And so for me, it was about really delaying it. And that's why I did all these surgeries about at least a year apart or more, was to give time. I got the facial feminization surgery, and then I got married later in May of that year. So I had the surgery done in November, and then about 8 months later got married, and had our wedding. And I really wanted it for the wedding because I wanted the pictures to have me as I would look for, I guess, into perpetuate, into the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
then a year from there, get the breast augmentation.
Okay. And when did you find that you're like, I'm here? Are you there? Have you transed?
Yeah.
You're transed.
Yeah, I have. I'm here. I am not doing anything more.
Yeah.
And I will say I kept the idea of getting bottom surgery on the table all the way through until I had my breast augmentation. And I realized, no, I am done. I am not going to go down that route. And a number of reasons, but the biggest one was that I felt that the procedure was more risky and would do more harm than good, because the number one thing I saw in detransitioner narratives was regret over that particular surgery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of what it meant for my partner, who I definitely loved and still love, and wanted to continue to be able to give her as much as possible in that particular way. So
yeah.
That was perfect.
Is there not like a tension between the hormones that you're ingesting and then the hormones that your body's producing? And how trusting are you of the science of endocrinology on understanding the long-term effects of HRT for you and that? Do you have a good relationship with your endo?
So I actually don't have an endocrinologist specialty. Like I don't have an endocrinologist doctor. I do my hormones through Planned Parenthood. Since moving to Richmond, before I did have an endocrinologist in DC, but I kind of got on this regimen that I like, which is injectable estrogen and no testosterone blockers.
Okay.
So I don't, and I do, there is tension. There is, to get back to what you're saying, but it's tension with the long-term effects and worries about what that could mean, and efforts to reduce that as much as possible by taking bioidentical estrogen injectable versus any other form, especially metabolic, where you take a pill and you process it through your liver. Yeah, I've done a fair amount of research on it, and it seems like the safest long-term approach is to do the bioidentical injectable form without doing T testosterone blockers if you're able to do that.
Hmm.
Everyone's body's different and produces hormones at different levels, but mine was pretty good about bringing down the testosterone and then staying out without needing to take testosterone blockers.
Hmm. You've had a very blessed, graceful transition. A lot of, like you're very passable, and it sounds like your endocrine system is harmonizing well with this. What do you mean bioidentical? Is like you're a vampire? You go out at night and like suck the estrogen from unsuspecting females?
I just, it's like, I think there's different forms of injectable estrogen. It's been a moment since I've looked into this, so
Okay.
I really don't know, but
Just curious,
I just
yeah.
know that estradiol valerate, I think is the name of it. But it's essentially what I prefer is to keep the feminized effects, keep my testosterone down. But otherwise, I just take a shot of that a week, and that is it.
Okay.
Um,
What are the emotional consequences of this, if any?
oh, yeah. Well, I
Do you
think
sit there and just
the
glow
biggest
and then glower?
no, I wish that would be so great. No, I going through transition was tumultuous. Like the actual time where changes were happening and people would begin to change how they interacted with me. And sometimes if they could tell I was trans, would have like a guarded distrust.
Yeah.
But
You're like this uncanny valley
yeah,
between the sexes.
yeah, yeah. But that was short lived, really, because it was just that year, and then I had FFS, and then it was like I had already. Oh, I forgot to say I did electrolysis very early in, and started work on that right away. Like I was very determined to take all the steps to pass. I really wanted to go from gay man to passing trans woman because I wanted to get away from the social issues that came with being identifiably a feminine gay man, which I
Hmm.
inevitably was pegged as.
Okay.
Um, Even though I would have said I'm bisexual, I am more dimensional than that. Um, and so but
Hmm.
yeah, so I wanted to do the full transition. But then I eventually came to peace with, some parts of myself, didn't do the full transition. And to this day, I feel like that was the right decision.
Hmm.
Um, to try to find peace, and that's how I like to approach. That's what I think good therapy does for this, is it does try to find peace with your biological sex as much as possible, but always keeping it open, the option for transition if that person finds that they need to, but under the premises of being challenged, not under the premises of being affirmed. Like, yes, we can do this, but why do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
Have you read about some of the dangers that can happen with this? Do you know? Like, how can you really give full consent if you don't know all the things?
Yeah. Where do you find yourself being inspired or compelled to speak into this conversation? Like
Mm,
where do you want to move the conversation?
um, that's a great question. I think what my role is here is just to show the diversity of people that go through this gender dysphoria experience, and also that, I think it's really easy for the person who doesn't understand or doesn't connect with the struggles of like dysphoria or body image struggles to write off the struggle and think you can just be happy as your biological sex and you need to just deal with it.
Hmm.
And I think I see that sentiment increasing. And then I see increasingly online people being like, there's no such thing as trans, and that are really just dismissive of the
Hmm.
struggles that
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a compassion here.
Yeah.
And compassion, I think, is very closely aligned with Jesus and God, actually, and in the stories of the spiritual realm to an extent. And I think that my role is to try to bring that, but also to bring some truth back. I think there's a big lie in the trans community that your gender identity has nothing to do with your sexual orientation, and I just wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. I think if anything, the true people who benefit from transition have a sexual orientation connected to it. Your body is the interface for sexuality. I don't see how you can possibly think that there's no
Especially
connection or
sex
relationship.
characteristics of all things, not having anything to do with
Ex-
sex. What are you talking about? Get real.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But you hear that message in the mainstream, like trans culture, more or less, for lack of better, LGBT culture. It's one of the things they'll say is there's no connection. And it just irks me so much because I mean, I just know that's not true. And
Hmm.
that's going to lead people that are otherwise confused and maybe otherwise hate their body, but it's not connected to an enduring pattern of attraction or an enduring attribute that produces feelings that persist over time. That was really what made me realize. So going back, that's what made me realize that I needed to confront this decision to transition because the feelings weren't going to go away. It was a matter of how I managed it. And I was young enough and I was realizing this to set up my life in a way that I wasn't going to regret. I knew I would regret things so much if I fought it and needed to transition later on after marrying my
Hmm.
now wife. That would have been the ultimate mistake. And I wasn't going to have that be my life story.
How does that square with your faith or your interaction with your childhood faith?
Yeah. Well, I didn't really have, so I kind of was away from the faith when I was going through a lot of the decisions to transition. And the moments of like battling the dysphoria. I was very much in the secular space and trying to understand things through evolutionary lens and adaptations and how it'd be advantageous one way or another to do things a certain way.
Hmm.
In particular, I was really into the emotion of disgust and trying to understand more about that immoral emotion so I could help convince or otherwise earn sympathy from my community at home,
Hmm.
which was my parents and friends of my parents that were otherwise in religious circles and Christian circles. And I wanted to somehow, see if there were any strategies I could employ to help, again, understand me and earn sympathy and not be so judgmental to my life choices.
How did that go? How has that gone?
Well, I never really took away a really good strategy, except for the one of being open-minded, listening, and sharing my story with them about particularly how this has persisted over time
Yeah.
and isn't just something that I decided to do out of the blue. A lot of Christians will think like gender dysphoria, at least this is what I've kind of seen, is that they'll think of it as sort of a willful disobedience.
Hmm.
Um, that you're like not okay being in the sex you were born,
Yeah.
and it's sort of like it's something you're not properly taking to God and not working on, and is essentially like the sentiment that I often see. And I just so wholeheartedly disagree with that.
Really?
I Yeah, I don't think it's willful disobedience. I don't think so. Something else that I don't like about the whole autogynephilia narrative is, one, I don't like the word. I think it's a bad word to use. I think it sets off cues in people's minds that is misrepresented. And I think that has to do with the fact that words are shared meanings. They're not describing a sound to a concept or object. They're helping people orient around a concept together. It's a shared meaning. And the original use of the word love of oneself as a woman is not what people think. It's not what is taken away from the word. Um, Gender criticals, I think, online have really weaponized it
Hmm.
effectively to sort of, bring back the what is it? The word that is a stigma. They brought
Yeah.
back the stigma with it to
Yeah.
shame.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I mean, it sounds autogynephile, sounds like pedophile.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
not any mystery that this is effective. And I think there's a strategy, a usefulness for them to use that word to shame, and otherwise they want it to sort of be the reason for everyone. But I like the term autosexual a lot more, or auto-heterosexual, like you said about what Phil Illy sort of wrote about, as being more encompassing and speaking to the persistent nature of sexual orientation and how, especially in males, it's very fixed. It doesn't really change much. Whereas for females, it's harder to understand concept and it is a little bit more adaptive, right?
Yeah, more fluid, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of going into that well, okay. So I guess, why was I bringing that up? I don't even remember now.
Yeah, in communicating your experience to people who otherwise would reject you based on this experience or castigate you based on this experience.
Right. Yeah. It was very much like I wanted to focus on the emotional struggle and talk about the disruption in my mind with the dysphoria and how that would cause problems for me just in existing in life. Like if I'm not busy or even just I remember driving home from work one day and I saw like just a girl running by the side of the road and I thought like she had a really cute outfit on and I was like, "Oh, I really want to wear that." And I was like, "Oh, but I would just be ostracized and like hated on unless I transition and then I can." And it's like all fine. And it's like, I wanted to look cute. I wanted to look beautiful. And
To who?
to me, to myself,
Yeah.
I wanted to see that. And I wouldn't mind, honestly, the attention from males, which
Yeah.
also was sort of part of it.
How have you adapted to the attention from males?
I love it, to be honest.
Why?
I'll be completely honest.
Why?
Like me and my wife, we have such jokes about it. Like we've also like before my Christian phase recently, we did have a little bit more of an open marriage and we did bring in just a few select really attractive men to sort of mess around with because we each like men, so it's easy to do. But I've recently kind of come back away and been like, don't know if that's good. Not really sure. And that's kind of where like the Bible side of or the Christian influence has I think been really good and something I want to continue in and not letting the excesses of transition lead me astray or misguide my life. Like you said, you put yourself in this moral gauntlet. I really like that you said that because it's actually really true in a lot of ways for this. Like you got to be careful and there's not really any resources. There's not really good resources to lean on for where these mistakes happen. I think there are, but it's hard to find.
Yeah. I mean, there's no trans Ecclesiastes. Wisdom literature from the autogynephile set. I mean, it might be in there if it's a persistent condition through time, but it's a hallmark of degenerate societies when males feminize. Because I think there's reasons why that's been guarded, and its affordance. And I appreciate when I was thinking about when you were talking about communicating to your Christian community, it's like, well, you can go about what society wants to do, which is just destroy disgust. And then where does that leave society without a disgust reflex? Like, where does that is like Chesterton's fence. Like you're breaking down something that's there probably for a really good reason. And the way that your tact has been, it seems like to me, is that you base it on relationship and on, a one-on-one relationship, on respect, mutual respect, and not on, you're not trying to advance something unless somebody's, it's not transactional. It's cooperative. You want to cooperate with these people. And so being aware that this disgust is there and that you are treading on some sort of line, and then recognizing that and then working through that. And then it also shifts your attention from what you can get away with, how you're being subversive, how you're playing with that line to how you're respecting that line, and then how you're serving the community. And then it puts you into a connective space with that community and it reintegrates you, I guess. And then it might end up teaching your community something about that gender role and about the purpose of that gender role. It's just odd that somebody would want to, it's odd, it's queer, that a man would want to signal cuteness to other men. Like, what is that? Like, that cuteness is there for an evolutionary purpose. It's there. And then, but women kind of take it out and they'll flaunt it on the street. This is the other part of that gen spec conversation. It's like, oh, men are doing that, but like, well, what about women that dress to excite men's sexuality? Like there's something there. There's a content there that isn't just, about getting off, but it's shared by men and women. So you're aware of that. You enjoy it. It's a delight. It's being beautiful is a part of life, and inhabiting that space as a man or as a trans woman now. Do you like that phrase? Are you a trans man or a trans woman, you think?
Oh, definitely trans woman.
Okay.
I wouldn't say trans man. That would just be like confusing.
Okay. Yeah. I guess it is confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just say trans woman. I mean, I think that term is exactly a good description of me. I mean, I'm received as a woman in social spaces completely. Like, it's not even a question. It's like, it's absurd to think that I would walk in a room and people would all act like I'm a man. I mean, that's absolutely not true. Also, most people don't know, in a lot of the spaces I'm in, they don't know. Only a couple people know that I'm even trans. And that's mostly because it would be exhausting to have to always tell people, hey, I'm a trans woman. Like, I don't really care for the trans identified male term either. I feel like, again, it sort of misrepresents. Trans identified male means, like, it makes me think of someone that is gender nonconforming, but is clearly male. And it's like, it's maybe the more accurate term in terms of if you want to talk about it from a biological lens, but there's also a social lens that is more true for some individuals, I think, than others. Which is where, like, something that Mark Yarhouse also says that I like is that if you've met one trans person, you've met one trans person. It's really difficult in a community like the trans community to propagate a single stereotype or a single dimension representation for the whole trans community. You can't really do that because it's so broad, it's so diverse. And that's where I think there's a certain humility in approaching the topic of transition that is best respected from the standpoint of some people may actually stand to benefit from the cosmetic treatments, while most probably would not. But we need to think about that and just be sensitive to the people. And ultimately, I think it's the person's decision once they're an adult and have the financial means and are, like, essentially in a place in life to actually do this.
With the proper support too. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that.
Sky, I think this is a good place to end the conversation. I think we have more to talk about. So hopefully in the future, if you're open to this, if this is a big hit and this provides the commentary that you want, and then this can maybe even stand as your calling card when everybody's like, wait, I'm trans, but I don't want to talk about, here's the interview. Just go and do that and then come back. If you have any questions, you can email me. Well, I don't mean to make light of it, but I do because I like being light. Thank you very much for being open to this. Where's your attention going forward now? What's the future look like? And what's the next steps for you? I guess we begin where we end, or we end where we began, like fatherhood or motherhood. Is it trans fatherhood? Or is it trans motherhood? Parenthood. Okay. All right. Gender neutral or inclusive.
Yeah. I like thinking of it as gender expansive. That's how I think of it. I'm not a female. I'm not a woman. But if you just say I'm a man, you're missing a lot of context. It's sort of an inadequate definition in my view. And the expansiveness of it all is that I'm a person. That's unarguable. And so I kind of just like taking the broader approach. And so I would probably go with if my child was going to ask me, are you my daddy or mommy? I would probably say mommy, just from the sake of the social viewpoint of a child yelling out mommy or daddy is going to be less triggering or confusing for the passerby to hear mommy. So I would lean towards that, but only for that practicality. Otherwise, I fully intend to explain to my child, like, I'm a man, or at least a male, and, but I had some unique challenges that led me to respond this way. And that is the next chapter, is I want to be a parent. I want to grow into that experience. I know it's going to only bring good things for me. It's going to cause me to re-examine my life like it did just from that momentary pregnancy before it turned miscarriage. And I know I need that. I need that in my life to live to my fullest potential. And before that, though, I can start now, and I can start making decisions now to set myself up for the challenges of being a parent and not being as selfish as I am today, and being able to just do what I want because I have someone depending on me. I have to get up at the night, or I need to help Tiffany and I really don't want to. I have to feed the cats myself because she's busy, or I need to do whatever it is.
12 cats.
I want to be...
You kind of brought that on yourselves there. 12 cats.
Yeah, we did. And we can't get rid of them. We love them too much. But being a parent is the next step, and getting more plugged into my community and forming more intimate friendships that aren't based on superficial dynamics. Like at work, I say it's more superficial because if they know I'm trans, they're great at hiding it. But yeah, no one knows I'm trans for the most part. So, living more authentically, though, is part of it. That's why I'm doing this interview. Is I need to live authentically, and I need to embrace the challenges that come with that. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'm going to help a lot more people by being open about my experiences and sharing what I can. And it's just going to be more fulfilling in the end. I'm going to look back on my time and I'll see it was better spent than just living a comfortable life in my house in Richmond with my cats and not really doing anything. And that's just not satisfying. It's not meaningful. And something I realized, I used to think Christianity was like a source of trauma in my past. And I've completely rethought of that now. I reframe it as it was actually the best gift that was given to me as a starting point for thinking about the world. And that's a big part of why I'm returning to it, is that I want to give that gift to my kids, which is a framework to understand things. And a lot of it came from listening to Abigail Schreier's Bad Therapy. I don't reject authors for transphobia. She wrote that other book.
Well, you don't reject podcasters for transphobia either. So here we are.
No, because transphobia is such a red herring for, you can write this off. Like, no, you can't. You should always listen to what people have to say. And I really liked what she said in Bad Therapy about, particularly about gentle parenting and how it leads to pipelines to radicalize kids, and how grateful I was that I never became radicalized in the trans community. The biggest mistake I ever made that came from them was trying to enforce pronouns for me. And I did make that mistake for a short window of, I say a short window, it was like 2-3 years that I was like, you need to say she, her. It was like my family, basically, because they were the only ones who really didn't do that. And it wasn't good. It's language policing. And I've completely backpedaled. I'm like, no, you can say whatever you want now. Language policing is just showing insecurities for that person. And I don't want to give that social space for people to hold over me. Like, it doesn't mean anything. You can say male, you can say he, him, or she, her, and it's all like kind of the same. I'm just a person. And that's
well, you're a cool person in my book, Sky.
Oh, thanks.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And are you open to people reaching out to you online? Is it your Twitter handle the proper way to challenge if people have questions, or you want to remain kind of? I've been trying to get.
I want to get on. No. Twitter handle is the way. Okay. I would say, yeah, and just my Twitter account, the one I emailed or messaged you on, is the one, and I'm working towards building a YouTube channel, or actually getting out there with my experience and sharing videos on it. Okay.
So, and that's active? I didn't know that. So it is. You have
well, no. I do have a channel that's it's like literally my own just personal channel. That's like a bunch of video content that I've made that has nothing to do with trans stuff.
You're just out walking around pretending. You're just going on to pretend.
I forgot to say this, but in high school, you asked me what persona I would be, or like what group. I was pioneering the video group.
Oh, okay.
I made videos in high school for any kind of project I could, and I made highlight reels for the sports teams because that was my way to like associate and engage them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was making videos back then, and then I kind of stopped when I went to college. But now I want to do it again and get back into it. I think I should.
Well, I'll link that, and when there's content, there'll be content. People can find you.
Yeah, that's a good, let's just say that. Yeah, we can't put a reference in the video, but
Yeah.
I'll give you, for sure, I'll give you the link.
All right. Excellent. I'm going to end the recording now. Sky, thank you very much for your Saturday afternoon.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.